Welcome to Economics and Beyond. I'm Rob Johnson, president of the Institute for New Economic Thinking. I'm here today with Ashley Monet, an actor, and Brandon Victor Dixon, also actor, producer, advocate, and together they are the co-founders of the WeAre Foundation, which I am very proud to have just joined their board. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us, Rob.
Happy to be here.
So, I keep hearing that song from the Average White Band. We got work to do. the We're in this place, this COVID virus. I mean, there's people been understanding despair since the time Donald Trump got elected, saying the system is rigged, and he beat 15 Republicans, and then obviously Hillary Clinton in the general election. And the depth and breadth of disruption and despair has been very, very painful. But I think the COVID virus is an unmasking that has taken us further. And I'd like to hear from the two of you today. How do you imagine the effect of this crisis and how it affects what you would like to achieve for our society through your new organization, weare.org?
Rob, I think you know, uh, what's interesting is that Ashley and I come from very different places. We have very different backgrounds, but we have both found ourselves. Our journeys have brought us to these pillars of art and advocacy. And with the We Are Foundation, these are things we've been working to synthesize. And right now, I think this COVID-19 pandemic really highlights, I think, a moment in time for us as a society where the the importance of the connections between us as human beings are being highlighted. I think more so now than ever, and it's been a growing element over the last couple of years. I think in our global society, but we are finding, I think, particularly right now, acutely that your systems, when your systems fail you, what do you have? You have the connections between human beings. And usually when systems fail, what you find it is they fail because of a lack of connection between human beings. And now for both of us, professionally and educationally, we've been blessed to spend a lot of time in the arts, and we have found that the arts is the most exponentially transformative force when it comes to bridging gaps, breaking silos, and transcending difference. Um, and so, right now, I think looking at this COVID-19 pandemic and looking at our organization, it's about thinking about these issues of human connection and thinking about how to further use the power of the arts to increase the strength of that connection at a time like this when our systems are breaking down.
And I think it's also important to, you know, um, in times like this, people can turn into themselves when things get very scary, when you don't know, how you're going to pay your bills, or when people in your family are getting sick. Everybody gets very survivalist, but in truth, it's when we come together that we can really overcome anything. And it's arts that can highlight that and give us that truth.
Yeah, for a little bit of, you know, just as an example, I think for everybody, I think it's important to note that throughout human history, we have seen uh, in civilization that arts and artists, have attracted and retained the attention of the masses, and that they not only have the ability to entertain and delight, but they inspire, they educate, and they inform. We know that a poem, a song, or a play can transform a generation, and we've seen examples of that. And Picasso's Guernica, books like To Kill a Mockingbird, songs like Lean on Me, or plays and musicals like West Side Story and Hamilton the Musical, which for me in recent history has created so many examples of art kind of breaking down silos and beginning to bring these areas of art and advocacy into further focus. And so, for us, the We Are Foundation is about focusing and harnessing that power of the arts that we've seen be exemplified throughout history and during times of catalytic change. It's about harnessing that to seize the narrative of this moment, and looking at where we are right now in this challenge. There is a narrative that we can tell about our society that focuses on fear and division, or we can create a narrative that focuses on connection, that focuses on what we did and what we do when things fell apart and fall apart around us. And I think that this is a moment that we really need to seize. We need to pay attention to the challenges that people are having on the ground and that they're having as a result of circumstances that they were in prior to this, um, and focus on what we can do to really create a unifying narrative going forward.
You know, it's a good thing this is an audio podcast because I'm sitting here grinning, both because I love what you're saying, but I want to tell you one of my guests recently, a woman who's now in America with a green card, but from Nigeria, named Olabumi, and she's worked on issues related to migration and otherness and how undocumented people are treated. And when I asked her a question similar to what I asked you at the outset, she talked about how when she was feeling afraid and isolated, just as you described, Ashley, what she did was she talked to a woman who'd been kind of supportive, not really a therapist, but kind of a mentor. And the woman said, "Go back to the place where you were happy and reimagine that and strengthen yourself." And the reason for my grin is not just that it's good advice, but the place she described in our podcast she went to was the soundtrack of Hamilton. And she sat and she sat with that, and she went kind of introspective, and then started seeing crisis as opportunity. And she emerged, how they say, vital and strong, which is her nature. And our listeners can find that on the same constellation and list that this podcast will be. But Tolu already had, without knowing you, had already received energy in the way you describe from the things you have created. So
Mm-hmm.
it's an encouraging sign. You, the two of you and I have gotten to know each other a little bit. I mean, I'm very sympathetic, and I knew Rick Keating and Steve Gluckster knew this because of my family's involvement in the arts. My mother worked with the Detroit Symphony and was a singer. My father was a physician and a very, very accomplished jazz pianist. And he had lots of people like uh, Marvin Gaye and Berry Gordy and others were acquaintances and sometimes patients of his medical practice. And that art, that artistic scene in my life was so powerful that I've often told people that I I viewed what my parents communicated through music in preparation for dinner. My mom would be in the kitchen singing. My dad would be at the piano, and I'd listen to how hard was his left hand. Is she singing along with him, or are they wrestling? Can I sit down at dinner tonight, and can I ask for an allowance, the car keys, explain a bad report card? And the music was my compass as to the emotional context of my family. And I always trusted the music as an art form that was telling me more truth than words. So I love how you're describing the way in which what you might call we need this in our education system, in our way of seeing and feeling. Brandon, you talked in our conversation earlier about the STEM disciplines: science, technology,
Yeah.
engineering,
Yeah.
mathematics, and but the arts have to be infused in the language. It's I don't want to be silly, but it's the heart of the matter.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the thing that people tend to misunderstand, people have a very limited definition of art or what it means to be an artist, right? They think of it just as people who paint or sing or dance or and really for me, being an art being an artist is more about the philosophy that you apply to your life and you apply to the development of your personal skills. um, you can be a surgeon can be artistic in the application of his skills, a lawyer in the application of an argument. Same thing with an engineer. An algorithm can be an artistic feat. It's really about how do you drive your skills and your knowledge of self to a point where divisions fall away and you can create a deeper connection with self, and in the consciousness of others around you. So it becomes about how you approach things, not just what you are doing. I had a conversation with some students down in Florida, a master class for a national arts scholarship, and I told them, it's like you're not working to become an actor or become a singer. It's not a final destination. You're a conduit. It's a path to something. So now you're going to use your acting, use your dancing for what? Your storytelling for what? What is the why of what we're doing? And I think that's the thing that people need to start to embrace. As you said, STEM is nothing without STEAM. It's if we are honing technical skills, they're worthless unless we can apply them to human interaction, to human achievement, to human growth. The best apps are not the ones that do things for you, but the ones that help you to learn to do things more quickly for yourself, more efficiently for yourself. And those are the things that we need to hold on to and that we need to drive forward. The crucial importance of, I need to allocate funds. Even we're talking about, these stimulus packages that are coming through, or as New York is trying to form an economic reopening plan, and you don't include any representatives from, theater entertainment, which generates billions of dollars a year, which accounts for, thousands upon thousands of jobs and supports a secondary and tertiary industries. We have to really expand the manner in which we think about arts and how they apply to our lives and our culture and how we build as human beings. The story is the why, and there's nothing more motivational for a human being than the why.
And when you look at STEM, we're looking at the machine of things, the algorithm of things, how we build things. But what do we use those things for? And art informs, the why that Brandon was talking about, and informs our culture and our community. So, science, learning science with what why, we're trying to make human life and human experience a better experience, so that we may commune and exist together. And even in these times, many of our colleagues are artists, and even in this time, we're watching people turn to art. People are at home, you know trying to handle all of the things everybody is trying to overcome, pardon, but people are, listening to music and creating things, and I'm watching people draw for the first time, or even redecorate their house. All of those things are informed by the art that you've consumed your entire life. And for me, from a personal place, art can change lives in ways I think that people don't actually realize. And there have been some articles about people being at home in troubling domestic situations, or emotional or physical violence. And I couldn't help but thinking of a friend of mine that um, noted that a particular artist had really gotten them through a domestic violence situation, that their lyrics gave them the empowerment to overcome that situation. And I know it sounds, very romantic, but hearing so many of these accounts, one on one, it really pushes me to try to bring arts and the ethos of arts and the idea of people coming together and making something, or building something together, or participating in their democracy together to form a better life for your community. um, isn't as romantic as I think that some people try to make it seem.
One can, how I say, push the pendulum all the way to the other side, where the Cartesian Enlightenment thinking, which was founded essentially in the aftermath of the 30 Years' War, is this pretend antiseptic, quantitative, value free way of seeing, except it's not. That's a mask, that's a disguise. And the search for meaning, the search for values, the search for why is something that's very, uh, how would I say, it's very inspiring. It's, how would I say, what was the name of the book years ago? Feel the fear and do it anyway. But where do you get the do it anyway?
I'm unfamiliar
Where
with
does
the
that
book,
come out of?
but you know that is fear is an indicator of what needs to be done.
But I think, I don't know. Ashley, you were talking to me as we were preparing for this about the disparity between communities and about the, uh, how I say, need to enlarge our sense or our awareness of what community is. This pandemic illustrates many, many things that in fighting a disease, we're embedded in a very large community. It's all over the world. And but I'm interested because the nature of the work that I've agreed to do with you, the distance between the prosperity of adjacent communities in Detroit is something I've always found horrifying. How do the two of you see the role of the arts and the nature of healing in a place like Detroit? What is it that you hope to impart by choosing that as one of the platforms that you're going to build your reputation and impart goodness to the world?
Well, I think one of the keys for us in Detroit is the unique history of Detroit, the unique tapestry that is Detroit. Different communities, but linked together through, I think the very specific culture of Detroit. In my professional experience, one of the shows I developed was called Motown the Musical, and as a result, I spent a lot of time with Barry Gordy Jr. And the Motown family, and time in Detroit over at Hitsville and in libraries, and just trying to get to know the city and get to learn more about the culture. And I've always been struck by the extraordinary art and artists that have come out of Detroit, but also that the art that they all created was so embedded in the social exchanges of the time. Um, and so, when we look at Detroit, there are the amidst all these kind of these disparities that you talk about, with respect to different communities in Detroit. When we look at the area, there are communities that we want to help support and bring resources to, but in focusing on the Detroit area, it's the specific culture and the integration, the already integrated and connected nature of the arts in Detroit culture that we think make it specifically a wonderful area in a community whereby an arts fueled narrative can potentially take hold. Um, it's really largely due to the specific culture of the communities in Detroit. And as we have, gotten to connect more deeply with our partners in that area, we are finding that potential is even greater. But as Ashley was mentioning, the issues that are happening right now, um, as a result of COVID-19, are really just exacerbating the state of things, the economic and limited health, that limited health infrastructure that most of these people in these communities were dealing with before. as part of lack of political agency, political cohesion, and I think connection to the both the local and national politics of their area.
In my own experience, I'm kind of grinning again because in 2016, I went back. The Institute for New Economic Thinking did a 2.5 or 2 day conference, really, at the Charles Wright African American Museum in Wayne State University. It was called Tomorrow's Detroit's and Detroit Tomorrow. And William Barber was our keynote speaker. But in preparation for this conference, which was 3 days after the presidential election where Donald Trump was elected in 2016, I went around with a photographer friend of mine on bicycles all around downtown Detroit to make a montage of the street art that would be used as backdrops for the panels over the 2 days. And as it turned out, the people at the company Shinola lent me a bicycle. There were 25 of these bicycles made, and they were designed to commemorate Muhammad Ali, who lived in Michigan. He lived in western Michigan, a place called Bergen Springs, in the last portions of his life. Or I guess I would say after he was a boxer. And the story was that Muhammad Ali was about a 12-year-old boy. And he went on his bicycle to the Louisiana Home Show, where new household goods and things were on display, like a little fanfare or convention on new products. And while he was inside, his bike was stolen. And when his bike was stolen, he went into a rage. And a woman said, "There is a gentleman downstairs from the police department. Come with me and they'll make out a report." And when this young boy, who at the time was called Cassius Clay, got down there, he was very feisty and very animated. And the gentleman said to him, "After I finish this report, I want to know, would you like me to train you to be a boxer?" And Muhammad Ali, by getting his bike stolen, was kind of jolted by an episode into becoming a boxer. And I was riding around with this photographer as he told me the story, and we stopped in front of a mural that was drawn on the side of a wall. And it said, "A star is born through immense pressure, and we have had our share. The beacon of light you see in the dark is our fair city, rising from the night sky." When we walked back to our bikes, the gentleman said to me, "What was the experience like the stolen bike in your life that made you who you are?" And I looked at him and I said, "It was growing up in Detroit with the race riots, Martin Luther King's assassination the next year. It was the Vietnam War. It was the labor management conflicts, where one of my Little League Baseball coaches was Walter Reuther's bodyguard when Walter Reuther died in an airplane that was bombed." And so I said to him, "I grew up in a cauldron, and it changed my way of looking at things, because Detroit was a place where they blamed Black public administration. They blamed the victims, and they seemed to be trying to assuage the anxiety of the rest of America when Detroit, which had been the center in the automotive realm for many years, the center of the U.S. economy, and the violence and the velocity of decline created what we now call diseases of despair. And I remember watching a television show, it was around 1990 on CNN, and this caption on the show was Detroit, a city that throws a shadow over tomorrow. The work that you're doing with the arts, which touch me and take me to that place where it was like the crucible of my existence, is so powerful. And Detroit is a place that, if it is healed, I will think will create a sigh of relief in many parts of America, because what happened to that place is dreadful and very contrary to the notion of community and all being part of a nation. I look at Ashley, you've said to me that you need to restore people's faith, that as members of a community they have action, they have some license or way to improve things. How do you envision the arts can create the warmth and the heart, the impetus, the enthusiasm, but how do you envision
You
giving
know,
people
I
that faith that they're not disenfranchised, they're not just spinning their wheels?
right. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, which is the South with all the Florida perks, basically. And you know, Jacksonville is the biggest city in America area wise. And so, with that, when you have such a large city, there are pockets that just get forgotten. So anything, low income or anybody living in poverty, the school systems, the jobs, those areas are just forgotten. And so then you know people down there don't participate, in their democracy because they walk outside of their front door and they see that there is no value in that. That's how that is viewed. Um, and when I look at Detroit, I see a lot of similarities there. And you were talking about the murals, and I really love that. And what Brandon was saying about studying the music. Some of the greatest art and athletes actually have come out of Detroit, and so that in itself to me is the love language of Detroit. And so being able to connect with people via the arts is something that I think is retainable. And I think to speak from a personal place, or very simply, given that Detroit is predominantly the black population there is so high, um, that is really a catalyst to be able to connect with people in a way that pamphlets and information just doesn't. Um, but I do think it is a great hurdle to overcome in the Detroit area, when so often things have plagued or hit communities there, and the government, for all intents and purposes, doesn't give the people in lower income places what they need to overcome the things that have hit the community. I mean, I was doing research and got into a rabbit hole about the housing crisis in the 30s, and when there are uh, systemic prejudice that comes all the way from the top, and that's what you've experienced generation after generation, it can be disheartening. And I think that using arts to remind people that we are together in this, as opposed to all of us being a separate entity, and that there are more of us than there are of them, and that sure, your vote doesn't count singularly, but your vote counts if all of us are voting um, towards the greater good of our community and the things that are plaguing our community. And I think that this time, while when it first hit, um, you know, being the co-founder of an organization that was trying to do really specific events that required people to come together at first, you know, to speak simply, I was bummed. I was like, well, I don't know how we're going to reach people now. But what it has done is really highlighted that our local government really does have agency over us, and that we can truly participate in that, and we can really see how our local governments are affecting us. And I think that that in itself can inspire people to participate, and we can point to that, and it's very real and it's very current right now. And I think that, one of the revamps to our initiative that I'm working with is creating an artist coalition of the actors and the musicians and the fine artists in the area that right now can't create in the same way that they usually do, to come together and really create localized content to um, engage people and excite people, and turn an eye to the issues that are happening very specifically in different communities, um, and trying to highlight the things that they can be doing, and voting towards, and also just reminding people that they are in this together. Brandon and I noted that, things come in waves during this time. It's sometimes people feel the energy in the air, feels like there's some sort of panic, but then there are these waves where it feels like everybody is calm because everybody is going through this together. And I think that there is something in that, and I would like to mine that, to try to bring people closer together.
Yeah, Rob. I think when it comes to the manner in which the arts can really directly help, I think, heal these disparities. Uh, some of it is caught up in these elements of both a personal and public narrative. And I think the power of active messaging cannot be underestimated. The messages we tell, we tell each other about each other. We tell each other about ourselves. We tell ourselves about ourselves. And when you look at when we look at these elements about kind of individual power and collective power, these are the levels upon which we have to work, particularly in areas like Detroit. When you talk about kind of how things have been gutted systemically for generations, that means you have generations of young people and now older kind of adults who do not have as much personal agency. It was not necessarily instilled in them, and then collective agency as well. And so there needs to be a restorative process. You look at a lot of the activism, like the waves of real powerful substantive activism that have happened in our country, came throughout like kind of 60s bridging into the 70s and the 80s, right? And these were hugely like explosive times for the arts and for culture, but also for education and universities. That's where a lot of these kind of movements and these things synthesized and grew. The arts are the synthesis of the humanities, right? It's the science of the humanities, history, literature, philosophy, anthropology, and so I think, as I said, the active messaging needs to come to bear. How we talk to each other about what we are capable of. How we talk to members of our community in areas like like those in Detroit that have been disenfranchised. How we talk to each other about what we are individually capable of, and then what we are collectively capable of on a greater level. But I think the arts have the ability to spread those messages in very visceral ways.
Yeah, I sense you're right. A podcast I made last Friday, and this is Monday, with a dear friend of mine, Ed Pavlik, who is a poet based in Georgia but comes from the Midwest, come from Chicago originally. Uh, Ed's writing about all kinds of things that are very tender in relation to racial animosity and otherness. But Ed also wrote what I think is the most penetrating understanding of James Baldwin, and how Baldwin, listening to the Detroit artist Aretha Franklin's song from the album Aretha Arrives called I Wonder, had an epiphany. And he had seen himself as a very successful person in public debates, but he saw himself as creating polarity and animosity even when he was winning the debates. And he said that Aretha, when she sang, spoke both to the people and the person. And
Mm-hmm.
he then transformed, with the help of his friends Ray Charles and Harry Belafonte, the way in which he approached inspiring change. And I know we'll have Ed's podcast posted very closely in time with yours, but I must introduce you to him, the two of you, and he would have an awful lot to talk about and explore, and he would be very invigorated learning from you.
The
On
vehicle.
election day, oh, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
No, I was just saying it's but you're right, and as I see, the vehicle matters. The vehicle of communion. It can be the difference between understanding and not. You know.
Yeah, well, I'm always amazed. When I was in high school, there was a study done that said that Detroit had the most number of places of worship per capita and per square mile of anywhere in the world. And I recall Henry Ford had spent a lot of time in the 30s and 40s building up places of worship in many denominations. But I've always had this sense that probably more than any other type of music, that gospel music conveys that notion of togetherness and community. My friend and neighbor Anthony Hilbert here in New York wrote the book The Gospel Sound. He had produced a couple of Aretha's records. But the psychology that's revealed in gospel music has the characteristics that I'm listening to the two of you describe wanting to infuse into society.
Have you is gospel music the only place you have seen those elements realized in that way?
I wouldn't say it's the only place. I would say just watching John Coltrane's quartet in jazz or seeing uh, beautiful interweaving and improvisation among musicians. But there is something about uh, gospel music where the performers interact in the interaction, like in the Kojic Church of God in Christ, the interaction between the musical artists and the congregation and the minister, I think takes it to a higher level of intensity. How would you answer your own question?
I think, well, just keeping, I think keeping the example of Detroit and the nature of music you're hearing in Detroit. I feel, and obviously you experienced it more firsthand than I did, but I feel that a lot of those same elements are were certainly a part of a lot of the Motown music, the
Oh
popular
yeah.
music of the day, but the Motown music that came out of that time. It was a there was a there was an exchange amongst between a people between the people and the musicians. And I think also particularly what's interesting about this actually, and in watching this now making me think about The Last Dance and talking about the Bad Boy Pistons and again their
Mhm.
connection to the people of Detroit, the feelings of the
Yeah.
people of Detroit versus the way the rest of the world sees them or is looking at them, and the ability for the people to take the things that were theirs and use them as an empowering synthesis of exchange. And so I think that's also why the pop music of that day, the pop music of Detroit, which is Motown, also possessed those elements. What's interesting about what you're saying here, uh, Rob, is that you're identifying an area in which you are seeing a lot of the coming together, these elements that we want to bring into other elements of society. In the same way, I think in you were talking with John Powell, I think about how there are elements of you have certain thoughts and ideas about how the military is and whether it's good or it's bad or what it does, but there are elements of the military construct, process, environment that in which you were seeing these some of the ideals of society manifesting themselves, and it's but at
Yes.
the same time those ideals are manifested in investments in people that are going to serve a specific purpose. It's not investing in them for their own benefit or their own independent. Like it's investing in them to within a specific construct. And I think the thing we're identifying again, this gospel music, there's a synthesis of elements within a specific construct, and it's like how do we expand that into these other realms and these other elements. But I think that Detroit, in particular, as you talked about, I think Detroit has a particular connection to those things as a result of the specific history of the city.
Yeah. Well, I remember on election day, I walked into a store, and the security guard was a man named Ulysses, who had been a friend of my father's years before. And I said to him, "What's going to happen in this election?" And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, Mr. Johnson, when there's nothing on the menu anybody wants to eat, nobody comes to the restaurant. People are going to stay home." And I asked him how he thought that of that in the context of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And his view was that the Clinton years with NAFTA, criminal justice reform, welfare reform, had been very discouraging. And that Trump was discouraging in other ways, but that Trump had come right after the Republican convention to the Economic Club of Detroit and made a speech where he scolded the management of the auto industry for losing jobs for the community. And I left that kind of shuddering because I thought Ulysses was very insightful and has always been quite a wise man. But I saw the statistics of that presidential election. Of the 100 largest cities in America, the lowest percentage vote for Donald Trump was Detroit, 2.9%. DC was about 3.9%. But the key, you're talking about a city that had something under 800,000 citizens, not registered voters. Turnout relative to 2012, when Obama was reelected against Mitt Romney, was down in the city of Detroit by 122,000. When you're talking about roughly 98% of the people who did vote voted for Clinton. And I think that at Aretha Franklin's funeral, Jesse Jackson got up and gave a speech, and he talked about how he couldn't understand the city of Detroit and the Michigan electoral votes that resulted from their staying home when everybody was willing to stand 2 and 3 hours outside the Charles Wright Museum to visit Aretha Franklin, and that we had to repair our politics. And my sense is that you, with WeAre, are at the cusp of helping people see that they have to come together and they have a responsibility to each other. And one of those responsibilities is active participation in the political process. We can't afford despondency. And my sense is that you're well on your way to helping people see the necessity of engagement.
I think your point of what you said at the end there is probably the heart of it. We can't afford, or rather, it's what we can't afford. I think one of the elements here is that uh, there's this thought that at one point, it looks to me as like there's this feeling that at one point, you know, uh, Black America was fully enfranchised in the government, and then something happened, and and so anytime people get up, they say, well, why don't y'all come to the table, or why didn't people show up, or what has happened that is preventing people from, and it's a combination of never having been a participant in the first place, of having been stepped on by people who were participants in the beginning, and also as individuals have come through to say they're going to change things or make things more equal, finding that that has not really translated to levels that are tangible to them in their lives. Um, and so I think that that is an element that is at play, and in moving forward, it's part of it is for us is looking at these communities and of which we are a part, and saying, look, there's we understand some of the thoughts of futility with respect to participating in a political process, but the challenges that are before you are such that you must be operating on all levels in order to create any sort of form of momentum. You cannot just be operating one dimensionally. It means you have to operate on the educationally, psychologically, spiritually, politically. And so you have to begin to start forming political coalitions that, at least when the government does not respond to you, you as a collective can hold them responsible, hold them accountable. That's the only way to start to establish some sort of political agency, so that you're not always asking for things, but that you can start to demand things, that things become a requirement. And I think it's part of the messaging that that we're working to identify. It's these elements of understanding of what collective power means, but also these elements of understanding how to comprehensively attack the problems that are before you.
And I think it's also teaching people or showing them what collective power could be, could look like, can do. Because, you were talking about the the comment on showing up for Aretha Franklin. Brandon mentioned in the beginning that we come from very different backgrounds, and I come from lower middle class, growing up in, you know, right next door to poverty. And growing up as a young black girl, literally no one is talking to you about politics or voting or democracy. These conversations aren't happening. The the communities that people are looking at and asking why they are not voting are communities that are trying to survive. And when one is trying to figure out how to feed their children. These conversations about, within organizations or within our communities about the state of the world are very privileged conversations to have. Having the time and education to just sift through articles on the internet and find out where the truth is, or where you can find it. Those are all things that are of great privilege. These communities aren't, those conversations aren't happening. People aren't showing them or telling them. People are trying to figure out how they're going to get to work and who is going to pick up their kids, and all of these other things that people are consuming their lives with, because systematically they have had very few options to survive in this country at all. And so just looking in a blanket way at these communities and saying black people need to vote more, I think for me, in building out these initiatives and these events and these campaigns, I'm really trying to look at things from, in a very macro way, obviously, and how to, leverage the resources that we have, um, overall. But you really have to look at how you can actually reach people. And I think looking at neighborhoods and trying to reach people and neighborhood organizations and engaging, local politics and local neighborhood groups, because one of the things we talk about in the organization is sometimes to change people, I would argue all of the time, to change someone, you have to literally touch their lives. And these people have never been touched, they've been forgotten almost entirely. And so you have to find a way to reach them. And that's why we are trying to use the arts to do that. I mean, when you look at Detroit, it has, I believe, the highest poverty rate in the country, something around 30%. And even within that, it's like 47% of children in the Detroit metro area are living in poverty. It's how do you reach them? And I think art is the universal language that we can use to reach people.
Yeah. Brandon, where did you grow up? I heard from Ashley that Jacksonville was where she had her formative experience. How about for yourself?
I grew up in Gaithersburg, Maryland, which is
Wow.
just outside of DC.
Yeah.
Um, I spent most of my youth. I went to school at the National Cathedral in DC. So a lot of my
Uh-huh.
childhood spent running around in the shadows of Congress and Washington and our favorite people. Um, and then and then from there, I moved to New York City, and I've pretty much been here ever since. But I moved here obviously to continue my artistic journey. But if I look at all the shows I've done, they pretty much led me back to the halls of advocacy. So
Well, when I listened to the two of you, uh, what this kind of fusion of politics and art and heart, it reminds me often in as I was listening to you in this last 45 minutes or so of Bob Marley, who I always felt somehow knew how to connect
mm,
love with politics better than any artist that I had perceived.
Oh
absolutely.
yeah.
And I once had a sailboat for, I don't know, about 14 years, I guess, and I took it all over the world, in part because I wanted my children and my parents, who were sailors from the Great Lakes, to have experience together. And I said, I like to go to where there's no airport and where there's no highways, so you can see what I'll call the Mother Nature as God created it. But I said my ulterior motive was to prove to my children by traveling all over the world that it was Bob Marley, not the Beatles, who was the most popular musician on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And everywhere you went, Tonga, Numia in the New Hebrides, Solomon Islands, uh, just many places in off the coast of Africa. All you had to do was take a Zodiac into the dock and start walking, and you heard Bob Marley.
Mm-hmm.
And so my hypothesis was right. But I later I did a stint of running a blues label called Rooster Blues Records with a famous man who, as I ran it, continued to produce. He was the founder, named Jim O'Neill, and he found an artist who was, in my opinion, the blues Bob Marley, whose name was Willie King. And when you were asking me, had I heard in any other genres an artist that reminded me of the feeling of gospel music, I tend to agree with you that the things that came from Motown and came from Stax, which is sort of a fusion
Mm-hmm.
of gospel and pop and became what we call soul music, which was essentially
Mm-hmm.
like secular spirituals and secular gospel. But this guy, Willie King, did a call and response with his other singer, Willie Lee, and he made a song that I have to excerpt for our episode. And the name of the song was "Let's Come Together as One Community." So I'll probably have to sample 30 or 40 seconds of that because I think, first of all, he answers your question, but secondly, he underscores the kind of spirit that the two of you have imparted to me today. And I think I'm very fortunate to be able to work with the two of you, and both myself and the listeners are very fortunate to listen to your important message that you've shared with us today. I want to thank you both for being here. Any final thoughts?
Well, just we feel the same. We're grateful to you and to anybody listening. We're stepping into a time where we cannot underestimate the little things, the little thoughts, the little gestures that open doors a little wider for each and every one of us. And I think that's where we're at right now.
Hmm.
Yeah. Very good. I'm sure we'll meet again on this podcast in a few months' time. And as your work in Detroit and other places continues to progress. But once again, thank you for being with me today.